Hello, writers. I wanted to respond to your workshop comments and responses to each other's drafts. We kind of had a problematic workshop in our groups. Group 2 had a really excellent workshop, and Group 1 not so much. And so I'm going to try and provide some feedback, and this is the sort of thing we might do in a classroom if we were on campus, to really just spend some time going over the papers. I want to start first, as you're looking to revise your drafts for submission on Thursday, that you take a look at the handout in lessons under project number 2 literature review, and notice that in the basic features here, this is kind of what we should be really concentrating on at this point. That it summarizes here your literature review is not really, it's not new research that you're doing. So many of you are asking interesting questions, but one of the phrases or one of the things you could probably do a little bit better throughout your reviews is to keep referring to the idea that you're looking at research or literature published on this issue. This is not, necessarily your particular exploration. This is not your ideas on this issue. You're putting together a summary for your readers of what you can find out there in the current literature and research on the field. So just using that language more consistently, I think, would help throughout your drafts and help to sort of create sort of this sort of thesis at the beginning and a synthesis at the end. So that at the beginning you're basically saying, in this particular subject area, concussions in high school football, there have been many articles written in the last 5 years. Right now, much of the research is focusing on ways to prevent concussions. This literature review will examine the 4 techniques that have been written about most commonly in the literature, etc., etc. And then it would go through the articles, describe the studies, and then at the end there might be this synthesis where you would state, having reviewed these articles, one can see that there's still a lot of uncertainty about concussions in football, but researchers are continuing to look at this issue in this particular way. Okay, something like that. That's kind of the basic structure of a literature review. If you look at the handout, it does sort of go into some detail here. It says, based upon the criteria in the web link that I provided, most literature reviews are going to have an overview of the subject, which many of you are doing with some sort of introduction or background, objectives of the literature review, a division of the works. Maybe you say there were 3 articles written in this approach and 2 articles written in this approach, or these people are for this issue and these people are against it, or these studies were done on this element and these studies were done on this. Compare and contrast. There's some sort of organizing way that you're looking at these articles and this research as you review the literature. You should have an explanation of how each work is similar to or compares to the one before it, so there's some sort of transition between. Some descriptions of the sources as well. I'll try and show you some specific examples at this point. And in your conclusion, this is where the synthesis comes in. You have some sort of point of view that you offer to us. You've done the hard work of looking at all this research. Now you're sharing the results with us, and we really want to have some sort of summary or conclusion. And for those of you worried about grades, when we come to grade this, we'll see how effective you are in achieving these main goals. Some sort of clear overview or purpose that's directing your readers at the beginning through the literature review that's about to follow. Effective scholarship and research. Have you found the required number of sources, in this case 5? Are they good scholarly sources? Do they make sense fitting together? Do you summarize and describe these sources effectively? Do you cite them correctly? Effective synthesis of sources, your interpretation, your conclusions about what's going on in those, accurate and consistent citation, and then effective writing conventions. How well are you avoiding comma errors and sentence errors and the like? So for example, in lessons, you'll note that I posted this example. This is kind of a professional example from an APA handbook. And as you can see, you have Lisa Morano is exploring this issue, and she provides an abstract which gives a basic summary of the report that follows. And you'll notice that the language in the abstract is saying, here's the general idea, obesity, what is the cause of obesity? Obesity is a problem. Let's look at it in childhood. What is the role of medication in obesity? The paper compares the effectiveness. This is the abstract. That's just describing what's going to happen in the next part of the report. The paper compares the effectiveness for adolescents of the 2 only drugs approved by the Food and Drug Administration for long-term treatment of obesity. So Sibutramine and orlistat, okay? And those are the articles and the literature that's being reviewed in this paper, in this report. That's part of the discussion here. And then it offers kind of a summary. It says, this examination of pharmacological treatments for obesity points out the limitations of medication, suggests the need for a comprehensive solution, and sort of gives a summary of what the paper concludes at the end. So if you look at the way the paper is organized, can medication cure obesity in children? A review of the literature. So descriptive title saying we're looking at this issue, we're looking at what researchers have shown. There's an overview here that sort of frames the debate about childhood obesity, and then there's a series of questions. You don't have to do it necessarily in a series of questions, but what we like about this example is that it's very purposeful at the beginning. The reader is going to have a hard time not following the organizational structure of this paper. It's set out in 4 parts. You'll notice that the headings that follow in the remaining of the report all come in this order, and it asks these simple questions, and in each one of these sections is really focusing on 1 or 2 articles on that issue. So you have 5 sources that you're trying to write about and you're trying to organize and think about. That's the skill that we're trying to have you work on in this paper and that you're being graded on. How effectively do you organize this research that you've looked at, okay? And so here we go through the paper. You'll notice the subheadings. They're very consistent. What are the implications of childhood obesity? And all that the writer does, this first section's kind of short, but just sort of describes one article here and says this article is looking at the implications of childhood obesity. Is medication effective at treating childhood obesity? That's the second question under literature review. The widening scope of the obesity problem has gone this direction. As researchers Yavansky and Yavansky have explained, obesity was once considered, and now we're into this next study and a description of this research. So that's basically how a literature review is structured. Notice that there's several articles that are looked at in this area, kind of comparing 1 or 2 different approaches. There's some data in a table, but basically, again, it's just a review of the actual scholarship or literature that's gone on in this arena. I'm just going to go through very quickly a couple of the drafts that were posted in group number 2. They had some really solid drafts, a pretty good workshop, and I believe that both groups can look at each other's contributions, so I would encourage everybody to go to group 2 and look what they're up to. I want to say a few things. If we open up the first draft by Jason, a couple of things. There is an abstract. I want to remind everything that an abstract is just a summary of the report that follows. In your textbook, actually, in the unit we're looking at today with this unit with formal reporting, formal technical reports, on page 209 to 211, there is a, or I'm sorry, 212, there's a long discussion of the various types of abstracts or executive summaries. All you need to do is just summarize what happens in the remainder of your report. An abstract of this type is usually, these reports we're doing, these literature reviews are fairly short. An abstract is usually going to be 1 paragraph. It just basically is the same structure of the report, just summarized. A couple of other things. I'll just jump around here. Note that there's a title, this paper here at the top. Learning Statistical Literacy Through the Language and the Data. I like the title, but this should be in title case here in the paper itself, so that means every one of these words should be capitalized. And then you'll notice that there is an overall sort of structure here, an introduction that sets up the discussion of the subject. So it's following that format that I just reviewed with the example from the APA handbook. The headings are kind of all over the place here. Now some of this is formatting because of the forum, but I know that in a lot of the drafts I looked at there was not a lot of consistency in the headings, and the headings are actually reviewed very precisely in your text on page 99 to 105. There's a lot of good discussion about how to organize the draft and how to use the right language, the right active verbs to sort of describe your headings. We want to take the reader through the draft, but this is the right idea. Jason has the right idea here where he's trying to sort of organize these various studies. The other sort of suggestion I would give in regards to this is that these sources and these studies are mentioned and referenced, but they're not necessarily described very well. So what we could do in each one of these sections is we might come up with a clear organizational structure to sort of take us through some of the material. And some of the people who workshopped the paper said they got a little bit confused. And in the same way that that paper on obesity is saying, we're looking at the impact of obesity, we're looking at the cause of the effects of medicine, we're looking at this study. You might divide that up a little bit more clearly. Here we have statistics as language, the language schema, statistics at the issue. I don't know, the headings are not really clear as far as in the same way that that model paper that we looked at as far as telling me what each one of these sections does as far as describing what the research and the literature is that's under review. Part of the issue here is that Jason is also trying to sort of explain statistical concepts in general, and I think if we just come back and say, this is what researchers are saying on this issue, this is what this study shows, and you'll notice here, Kuzmic calls this a mature understanding, and there's just not a lot of discussion about the actual study from Kuzmic at this point. We need a little bit of context, we need a little bit of setup about where these sources are from and what they're doing. Okay, and then just some APA citation sort of things. Here, the title here should be in what we described as that sort of sentence case, so that when you get to the references page, you're not you're putting article titles in. Just the L would be capitalized in this case. The rest of the words would not be in uppercase because that's just the format. But you do have Statistics Education Research Journal correct in that is in italics, because that's the way we format that in the APA format at the end. Okay, let's take a look at another example. Katie in this group I thought had a nice draft as well, with a good sort of set of questions that are being asked here. Same sort of thing. The title for this paper in the report itself should be in title case. It should be, these words should be, effect should be capitalized, stress should be capitalized, but then in the works cited page it would be cited differently. The formatting as far as the heading is all over the place. It's a little bit incomplete. But there is an attempt in this draft, I think if you look at it, to sort of describe, or at least at this point in the rough draft phase, to sort of maybe mark what are the major findings of these studies. But again, we don't have a lot of setup or discussion about who Kochia and Darling are, what their sort, what article this appeared in. I mean, we do have the dates, but we just have sort of the citation here. Academic stress is caused by many factors, but a common cause is study habits. Maybe the language in here should be, in a recent study on this issue, Kokashi and Darling looked at a certain number of students and did the. We just want more description of the actual article in the study, because that's what a literature review does. It summarizes what the work is that's going on out there, not just the findings of these studies, but sort of the methodology and whether they're good reports or not. So a lot of this is just kind of put out as language. Here we have Puri et al. Now remember, you do not use et al. Unless you have at least, especially in your first reference, unless you have 6 or more authors. So it should be cited Puri et al. All the authors should be cited in the first instance, and then thereafter, I think there's only 3 authors in this case, thereafter it can be cited as et al. And we just need more description of the actual study before we go into the language here of the report. But a pretty good description and summary of all the studies, and an attempt to sort of bring it all together. I know the formatting is off here because it's posted in forums, but kind of all over the place. And we have this situation going on with the titles again. Here we have stress and health. This is a journal, so this should be in italics. And here you have the journal title, so this should be in lowercase except for the first word. So there's some of that stuff going on in each of these drafts. Chris had a really effective draft. I thought he had the best setup of any of the drafts that I've seen. He just didn't have the rest of the draft completed. He's got the title in the correct format. He's got a clear abstract that sort of describes the report that follows. He has a pretty clear set of questions that he's trying to ask. He's referencing the studies and the research. There have been many studies on the positive effects of catch and release, and it kind of promises that what's going to follow is a review of these various studies. So I like the way that one's set up. It just needs to be completed. And finally, in group 1, we have Casey's paper. And first of all, I want to point out the references are formatted exceptionally well here. These look really good. The titles are all correct. You'll notice that you have a lot of text and a lot of information at the beginning, some generic headings, purpose, Article 1, Article 2. This is a paper where you have good content. The next thing to do and revise is to really give a clear purpose at the beginning, set up the studies, describe the studies that are about to follow. It's a review of literature. What are the main findings? These are the things I think that would benefit all of these papers. So good job, everybody.